Hi, welcome to Midnight Baking with Christian. Tonight we'll be making the most amazing chocolate cake. For the cake and icing, you're going to need 1.5 cups of butter, 3 cups of all-purpose flour, 3 cups of unsweetened cocoa powder, 3 cups of granulated sugar, 7 to 8 cups of powdered sugar, 8 ounces of cream cheese, 1 tablespoon of baking soda, 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder, 1.5 teaspoons of salt, 5 teaspoons of vanilla extract, 1.5 cups of buttermilk, half a cup of vegetable oil, 1.5 cups of warm water, and 4 large eggs. Before you start baking, you're going to preheat your oven to 350 degrees, so when you're done with all your ingredients, your oven will be warm. Before we start mixing ingredients, we're going to go ahead and wash out our pans so they'll be ready whenever we're done. Now we're going to start by adding 3 cups of all-purpose flour to the bowl, and my recommendation is finding the biggest knife to flatten your scoop. We are now going to add 1.5 cups of unsweetened cocoa powder, and these scoops do not need to be exactly flat. Now we're adding the baking soda. For this 1 tablespoon, you're going to make sure it's exactly flat. For the 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder, you're also going to make sure they are flat scoops. And the 1.5 teaspoons of salt, I'd make sure they're a tad flat. You don't want a salty cake. After adding the salt, we're going to beat the dry ingredients on a low speed to make sure they're all mixed. We're starting on our wet ingredients. We're going to put these in a separate bowl. We need to crack 4 large eggs. And if you happen to get a shell, make sure you use part of the shell to get a shell out. Now we're adding 1.5 cups of buttermilk to the mix. Don't forget about the 1.5 cups of warm water. It's always nice. Half a cup of vegetable oil. And then we finally need our 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. Now you're going to beat on a medium speed until smooth. This should take a few minutes. After the wet ingredients are mixed, you're now going to add the dry ingredients, 1 cup at a time. Make sure it's fully mixed before adding the second cup. After the first few cups, I found it difficult to scoop them, so I just started adding the mix in from the bowl slowly. After everything is mixed, it should come out in a smooth consistency. Now it's time for prepping the pan. I use butter and flour and spread it around. You can also use non-stick spray if you'd like. After the pans are prepped, you're going to add 3 cups of batter to each pan. All 3 pans should be relatively filled the same. Now the cakes are to be put in the oven. I'd recommend cooking them to 30 to 35 minutes. But if they're not ready, you can always use a toothpick or a skewer to test. After the cakes are in the oven, you can use this time to clean up the kitchen. After 30 minutes, I tested to see if the cake was ready to come out, and as you can see, there is still cake on the skewer, so it is not. I put them in for another 5 to 10 minutes. After 5 minutes, I took the cakes out, and then I took another skewer and stuck it inside and pulled it out, and as you can see, there is no cake on. After about 5 minutes of letting the cake cool, I began trying to take it out of the pan. If you're having trouble getting them out, run something around the edges, and then flip the cake over and tap the bottom. After tapping the bottom, usually the cake will come right out. Now I'm going to let the cake cool for about 15 minutes on a wire rack, and I put tinfoil over all of the cakes to make sure they stay nice and moist. Now on to frosting. I added 1.5 cups of soft butter and 8 ounces of cream cheese and mixed until it was a fluffy consistency. After that, I added 1.5 cups of unsweetened cocoa powder and mixed. Then 3 teaspoons of vanilla extract. 7 to 8 cups of powdered sugar depending on how much you wanted to add. As you can see, the icing came out a little thick, so I added about 1/4 cup, maybe a little less milk to it to thin it out to make it spreadable. Now it's time to ice in the cake. I got the cake out on a stand and began putting icing on top. I did this until I had enough to make a nice smooth layer on top. And then I added the second layer and did the exact same thing. Then the third, and I filled in the gaps. And then my icing was a little thick, so I added some milk. And then I smoothed it all around and made it look all pretty.